feel I know most of you here still. And part of that is, personally or working, but part of it's because I essentially just read botanical reports. In preparing PRs, and I think for the last 10 years I've had a botanical report open on my desktop that entire time, or I've had a heavily leafed copy with full of post-it notes, or I've been on the phone to botanists that whole time. So I guess what I wanted to talk about is what happens after you do a survey. Because I use the report. I don't get to go, sadly, or happily, depends on where it is, potentially ever, and happy. Other places, well, perhaps sad, but I don't get to go out. I don't get to see the sites. So I'm writing impact assessments. Not just for botany, but obviously for zoology, groundwater, other contamination issues. But I'm relying only on the report. So I guess I'm not here to tell you about survey techniques or any of those details, just what happens in the report. And as I said, I feel like I know a lot of you in the room already. You may not know me, but I'm pretty sure I've read pretty much everyone's reports here. And the one thing in being asked to come along, I can't recall ever, I guess, having a chance to sit down and talk with botanists in a sort of sense and share what, as an EIA practitioner, I've used the word EIA practitioner as someone that likes EIAs as opposed to botanists, and I'll go into that a little bit later. But I can't recall a situation whereby we sat down and said, actually, if you could do this, it would make the EIA better. Or in having read all your reports, these are the things I see could be changed or improved or slightly different. And also, I guess, one of the things when I do speak to botanists, that I get the sense that botanists may not really appreciate, first of all, just how important botanical reports are in the impact assessment compared to the other disciplines and compared to the other techniques and how they compare. I'm comparing hydrogeologists with botanists here. But you may not really appreciate that. And one thing I would say is that in impact assessment, that's the key process in WA, obviously, for defining whether a project goes ahead or not. And you can't define a project unless you have a footprint. And you can't declare a footprint unless you've done a survey. So you can get around other bits and pieces, but I guess the message here to start with, and it's a way of encouragement, well, hopefully I think you take it as encouragement, but projects don't go ahead without botanists. Perhaps, after hearing the first couple of talks there, perhaps we may take that as a mixed message there in some ways, but it wasn't intended that way. In terms of the second points, and these two ones, I guess is really what I want to structure this quick talk about, and hopefully I run out of time. I don't have that many slides. And I've put a slight correction here on the second slide here. And listening to Kelly, I think probably perhaps triggered that thought there that, well, I think botanists do know why the surveys are being done, but I think the report, and botanists may not be clear on how or why the report, or who's using the report. And I want to go over that a little bit more, because I think different users use different reports in different ways. And the next one's, as I sort of picked up, we may not have this conversation very often. It may be in a formal sort of tender package that you have, do a survey that does this, but none of those conversations about what is going to be done and how it's going to be done. So, in terms of, in asking the question, who reads botanical reports or why they're done, I guess that it may seem like a bit of a silly question in some sense, but I think it is really important when you read these reports, when you actually get to compare different reports written by different people and for different reasons and different mining companies. This message, I think, isn't terribly well addressed. So regulators are an important audience. anything of regulators in any sense, but regulators will read reports for different parts of reports. And there's strong guidance, somewhat strong guidance, on the techniques, I'm looking at Kelly there, and what's required. When I see feedback from regulators on botanical reports, most of the comments are related in the methods and limitation of results. I generally think that's, as an outsider, in that sense, a lot of that's done quite well. It's not always done well, but I guess I focus mainly on reports that are going to a public forum, reports that will be used to support a public environmental review. So I would say there is variation, but generally where a report is going for that level of scrutiny, that generally those sections are done quite well. But what I would say is, when you're reading these reports, and I do encourage you to read other people's reports, but not just to look for holes or comparison pieces like that, just to get a sense of the reports, that sometimes they really read like they're written for regulators. And I think there could be a lot more. I think there could be a lot more in reports. But I might be biased as an EIA practitioner. So clients are somewhat important. They pay the bills, but they read reports very differently to regulators again. And quite often I'm on the phone with clients, and botanical reports come through, and the key focus is on how many priorities did you get, how many communities did they get, and they sort of have this metric. We get stuck in sort of metric loop about only 4 P4s. Oh, that's okay, because they're thinking about it's not in the sense of what it means, just in these sort of necessary steps to tick off sometimes. But having said that, some of the people that I've seen the most curious about the land are clients or proponents, and they do have an intrinsic sort of interest and curiosity in their land. But it varies client to client and day to day. So perhaps I think it's the point there I would say is it's, in talking to clients, it's probably not it's difficult to predict how they will read reports, but this sort of executive and conclusion focus they have is quite apparent. The one thing, I guess, as sort of a broader comment, and it's probably one of the challenges, there's a lot of challenges I know in the botanical space, is you get clients that want to strip everything out. They want to remove everything, remove the recommendations, and they want reports as a standalone piece. Now, I see both sides on this, and I sit on the fence a little bit to some degree, but one of the things that in stripping out those ones, you're just having a snapshot, which is good for comparison to other reports. But you need to do those other reports. If you want to have something that is a snapshot, well, you need to have more snapshots. It's can't be a be-all and end-all. And I think in trying to strip back these reports and to focus on, we reported 7 this and 5 that, you lose a lot of the context. And for EIA practitioners, there's no rhyme or reason to the photos, by the way. I just found something in our system. They're just ones I like. So, but the vegetation community context is the most important thing that EIA practitioners read reports for. And I guess I want to spend a little bit of time talking about this in terms of what I mean, and giving, I guess, an example. Quite often, reading the reports, there's pages and pages of detail on what was recorded in the quadrat. That's great. Going into this geology, the soil, if that's not carried forward into the discussion, describing the landscape context, then that information is lost, I think. And picking up that, so the discussion is the most interesting bit for an EIA practitioner. That's the bit I read first in reports. Everyone reads different sections first. That's the bit that I read first. And part of that is that botanists are in the field, they're making observations, whether they're walking between the car and the survey sites or they're driving across a site. There's a lot of information that you're observing that isn't in the report. Changes in landscape is a really big one. Where you have seen differences, or you have seen variation, or you have seen that soil makes a difference, bring that forward in the discussion. That's really valuable and really useful science. So getting on to what surveys are used for, and I guess I want to come back, and it's really useful that Kelly spoke first, I guess, from my perspective, and just picking up the second point there, that for the first, botany is a science, I think, and a great science. EIA is different, but botany and EIA are heavily related. So EIA is a justified interpretation of the science, and that really builds on context. So where EIA starts and botany ends, I don't think they really stop and start. I think there's a real crossover there in terms of how that context is brought forward. EIA is not just copy and pasting the results, the tables, sticking them in PR and going forward like that. Well, at least it shouldn't. So the next few slides, having set up that, I guess that point about that context there, what context helps the most. And looking in as a bit of an outsider and reading a lot of botanical reports, there's a few things that seem like black boxes. The survey design is a really interesting one, and I guess it's the last presentation there. It can go horribly wrong, or it can be ill-informed, or it can be misleading. But what I see and what I sense when I talk to botanists is that there's a lot of information they hold in their head that isn't necessarily in the reports about how they design the survey. They may know, oh, in the Pilbara you do it this way because you pick up this and that. You can judge by landfall and aerial photos. You have a really good sense before you go in, so you just know. Other areas you just know you do it this way. Well, I'm reading the reports and I don't just know, so I like this information. I think this is really useful. And that context of how you describe it as well. And I guess building on that science part of it is that you have a survey design. You've set out why I want to do this and what I aim to achieve. And I guess picking up one more thing about how the designs are made and this sort of, it's difficult to say, but scope adherence that you sometimes see, that the client has requested I survey a rectangle, so I went and surveyed a rectangle. Well, there may be limitations on access, yes, but if there is some areas of restricted areas in the corner, does it still make sense to survey a rectangle? Should it be moved slightly? Would it be a triangle so you pick up a further area north? Make more sense? I guess that's one point. The other one in the survey design is this, I think it's circular argument about quadrat. I know there's probably a presentation yesterday afternoon, I believe, on getting the 3 quadrats per community. Looking in as an outsider again, it seems, well, how do you know where the quadrat should be until you've analysed the data statistically? But you can't analyse the data until you've done a survey. So this sense of how you've arrived at why you aim for each vegetation is I think, often treated as a perhaps a limitation, or sometimes the reports seem a bit defensive, or they're justifying why they've made decisions. And I don't think they should be. I think it should be like a journey on, well, this is what we thought. We went out there and we noted that soil is changing things, or the geology or the landform or something else is affecting this, and we adjusted our survey design to pick up more of this. Because what's that doing is that's bringing that landscape function, that whole of site experience that you've gained from walking around the site, through the ticks, through the scratching of branches and bushes, into the report. And I guess a lot of this slide now is perhaps I've jumped ahead and covered a lot of this one here. But going beyond, I guess, just where the area is surveyed and looking outside, how does this relate to the area immediately outside the survey area? Does it look consistent? It's not, defendable in a statistical sense, but this information that I feel that there is pressure on botanists to remove really helps. It really helps to understand whether it's me reading it as a